to that chapter that we read from the Old Testament scriptures, the book of Psalms and chapter 11. Book of Psalms and chapter 11. And we'll read just now at verse 3. Verse 3. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now, this is a psalm by David, and like many of David's psalms, the background is difficulty and problems. That's true to life, isn't it, really? David's experiences, and we're working through them just now in 1 Samuel, are really what is true to life in general. And the psalm begins with a statement by David, which I'll return to later. In the Lord I put my trust. And then in verse 1, something new appears. Because you see there, after it says, in the Lord put I my trust, we have a snippet of conversation. How say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? Somebody is advising David here that he should run away. He's saying to David, to his soul, to David, you should get out of here. Now, why? Well, we're told because of the troubles that he faced and the danger. Verse 2, for, this is why you should do it, for look or lo, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow on the string, that they may shoot at the upright in heart. Because of the troubles you face, because of the danger you are in, David, you would be better to go away. Now, strangely enough, when we come, if we're spared till Lord's Day morning, when we come to the next section in David's life, this does tie in with it, although not in the most positive way from David's point of view. So that's the snippet of information, conversation. Flee as a bird to your mountain. Just escape like one of these birds that have their nests way up high, because the wicked bend their bow. And then in verse 3, we have a question. And the question that I read is this: if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? And we believe it's the same voice asking that question as gave the advice in verses 1 and 2. They're saying, David, you'd be better to go away. You're in great danger. And David, anyway, if the foundations are destroyed, what can you do? What can the righteous do? Now, the phrase, the foundations be destroyed, could be translated, the foundations are crumbling. The foundations are crumbling. And the person is saying, look, if the foundations are crumbling, what can the righteous do? What can we do in any case? Basically, the person is saying, everything's falling apart. And you might as well go, David, because you're in grave danger. And anyway, it's all in a state of semi-collapse. Now, it's not exactly clear when this advice was given to David. Might have been during his troubles with Saul that we're in the midst of at the moment in 1 Samuel. Might have been his troubles with Absalom. Might have been something else. We don't know. And it's also not clear who's giving the advice. Whose voice are we hearing here? Now, there are generally two views on whose voice it is. Some people say it's the voice of an enemy who wanted to discourage David and who wanted him to go away. It's a little like these people that you see in the book of Nehemiah, and they're full of discouragements. And You remember when they build the wall and they say, oh, you know, if a fox jumps on the wall, it will fall over. Some people say that's who's here. They're trying to discourage David and unsettle him. Other people say, and I think this is perhaps more likely, that it was actually a friend who meant well, who was trying to warn David, who was saying, look, David, things are getting really difficult. And anyway, David, the foundations are crumbling. Well, we don't know which of these two it is. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Because whoever is speaking, whether it's friend or foe, there's a note of despair here and a note of fatalism about it all that's not good. Faith seems to be conspicuous by its absence. Dependence upon God and trust in God's overruling providence seems to be missing from this equation. The wicked are going to nail you. Everything is falling apart. You should give up and hightail to some remote hideout. It's promoting self-preservation and a gloomy outlook. And here we are at our annual congregational meeting. And we look back at an AGM, inevitably, and we look around a little. It's one of these milestones in our congregational life. And we look back, and we look ahead, rather, as we look into the year that's coming. And you know, the application for this is obvious, and this is why I'm on this particular passage tonight. The application is obvious. We think of our own day, and many of the foundations are crumbling. It's not an exaggeration. It's not hyperbole to say that many of the foundations are crumbling. Now, I'm not going to spend any time demonstrating that to you. It won't be of any edification for you. You know it as well as I do. In many ways, the foundations that undergird Western Europe and Western society is crumbling as rapid change comes, particularly in the whole area of ethics and morals and so on. In our own nation, in many ways, some of the foundations which life is built on look shaky, to say the least. And even in the church, and I don't mean our own denomination, but I mean in general, in the church, in the visible church, in the professing church of our day, it's fair to say that many of the foundations are crumbling. And it's become harder and harder to raise a Christian witness, a Christian testimony, to be a Christian in the public square. It hasn't been so difficult to do that for a very long time. But you know, and that brings us back to our text. What can the righteous do, says this person. Now, here in the context, that's a very gloomy question. It's a shrug of the shoulders and a heavy sigh and a, well, what can the righteous do anyway? And they're expecting the answer, well, what can the righteous do? Well, not much, to be honest. That's really the question, the answer that they're expecting. Well, let's take this question and do with it what David does with it. Let's turn this potentially unhelpful question into a helpful question. If the foundations are crumbling, what can the righteous do? This psalm tells us that the righteous can do three things. The righteous can do three things. First of all, we must look in the right place. We must look in the right place. You remember the other voice was telling him in verse 2 to look at the wicked. They're bending their bows. They're ready to shoot. And, well, Satan often says that. You should give up because you're going to be overwhelmed. You're too weak. You're too small. You're too whatever. Look at that and focus on that. It's like Peter when he, with such enthusiasm, steps out of the ship. And then he sees the waves. And he realizes where he is. And his faith and his body begin to sink. He's looking at the waves and the wind rather than the Lord. Well, yes, it's wise to be aware of danger. There's nothing wrong with being aware if the wicked have an arrow. We've got to be wise as serpents. But if you're only looking there, I humbly suggest you're looking in the wrong place. So what's the right place to look? Verse 4. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the sons of men. Look, says the other person, look at the bows and arrows. Look, says David, at the throne. Look at the throne. Look, there is a throne. In other words, there is government and order in the universe. God is reigning and ruling. Foundations may be crumbling, but the Lord hasn't lost control. He is as much on the throne tonight as he ever was. Look, there's a throne. Look, that throne is occupied. It's not an empty throne. It's not random chance. We're not blown about this way and that way by luck and chance. Not a bit of it, of course. The throne is occupied, and look who's occupying it. Well, you say it's the Lord. Yes, but notice both references to the Lord in this verse have capital L-O-R-D. Now, you remember what that means. That's one of the special names for God, denoting his covenant relationship with his people. The covenant Lord is in his holy temple. Your Lord, in other words, if you are his, is in the holy temple. Your Lord, in other words, is on the throne. Not just any Lord, but your Lord. The one who has entered into covenant with you and has promised, as we saw on Sabbath morning, to fulfill every aspect of that covenant. And we saw on the Lord's Day morning, did we not, that Jonathan, well-meaning as he was, he couldn't do everything he wanted. But we saw the Lord could. Well, he is on the throne. He is a covenant God, and this covenant God is a holy God. He's in his holy temple. Goodness and holiness and authority and power. When the foundations are crumbling, what can the righteous do? Well, first of all, they can look in the right place. Secondly, they must grasp the right principles. They must grasp the right principles. In verses 1 to 3, the conclusion appears to be, it's all hopeless. There's no point in persevering. There's no point in praying. There's no point in anything, actually. Just run and hide and give up. The wicked have won. Satan has won, and it's all over. Now, at times, Satan will win certain battles. Righteousness isn't triumphant in every situation in this world, because we're still in this world. But in the long run, that's the wrong conclusion. You remember, God is on the throne, as we saw. And what is this God doing? Well, we're told in verse 4 that he's watching, that he's weighing it all up. His eyes behold, his eyelids try, weigh up the children of men. And at last, the God who is watching, who is weighing it all up, He will put right what is wrong. He will deal with all of it in his own time. In other words, wickedness won't win and Satan won't have the last word. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, first of all, they can look in the right place. And secondly, they can grasp the right principles and grasp them with both hands and find encouragement in that. The Lord is working and prevailing and doing his own thing as only he can. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? They can look in the right place. They can grasp the right principles. And thirdly, they can remember the right promises. And you'll find this in verse 7. They can remember the right promises. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doth behold the upright. I think there are two promises in this verse. Or two reminders of promises anyway. First of all, he loves his people. Well, you say the verse says he loves righteousness. Yes, I know. But included in that is his love for his people. Because he has established them in righteousness and he sees them clothed in his own righteousness. He saved them with a righteous salvation. They're being transformed so that at the end of the day, they will reflect his own righteousness. And if he loves them, he guards them. And he guards them because he loves them. No matter what, he is their refuge. We were singing there in Psalm 46. Although the earth remove, although the foundations begin to crumble, we will not be afraid. Now, as I was thinking of all of this in the last couple of days, I couldn't but think of the church in Afghanistan. They have seen their foundations, such as they were, crumbling outwardly. They must be very frightened. And I'm not going to presume to put myself in their shoes. But Psalm 46 stands. And how often has the Lord, with the crumbling foundations around them, gathered and kept and delivered and helped his people. You remember what Paul says to Timothy, 2 Timothy 2:19. Nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are his. Other foundations, well, they may be the way they are, but the foundation of God standeth sure. The Lord knoweth them that are his. We're back to my sub-point. The Lord loves his people. And he has promised regarding that. What can the righteous do? You must remember the right promises. The promise that he will love his people. And finally, the promise that he will gather his people. Now, if you look at the last clause there, his countenance doth behold the upright. Well, that's an encouragement, isn't it? That his eye is on the upright. But there is an alternative translation of the Hebrew here that reads like this: the upright shall behold him. It's a legitimate translation of the Hebrew. It can be translated as we have it, he beholds the upright, but it can also be the other way. The upright behold him. And if we take that translation as an acceptable one, ultimately, it means heaven. Yes, they behold him in this world, but the day will come when they will behold him as he is. No matter what foundations are crumbling, if you're a believer, you're like David. You're looking for a city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Here we have no continuity. And every foundation here ultimately will crumble. No society here will last forever. No social order here will last forever. Indeed, most of them, after a couple of 100 years, tend to decay. The empires that went before, they've all gone. Maybe it'll be the same for Western Europe. Who knows? I'm not going to pretend to be a prophet. I could be completely wrong. And it doesn't matter if I'm completely wrong, because this is telling us that the believer will be gathered to his Lord. He loves his people, and he gathers his people. In the days of Noah, the foundations crumbled as never before and never since. Every single foundation was swept away. Society was swept away. And there's Noah. And what does the Lord do? He gathers Noah. Gathers Noah into the ark. And Noah is the only person whose foundations didn't crumble. He and the few who were with him. Because the Lord gathers his people. And he's gathering his people into the ark of gospel blessing to be with Christ. And he will gather them home to a place of sure foundation. As it says in Psalm 17, as for me, verse 15, I will behold thy face in whiteness. Now my time's gone, I'll have to stop here, but what can the righteous do, says the question. Well, somebody has put it like this. They can wait patiently. They can trust confidently. They can look hopefully, because God is on the throne. And at an AGM, it's good to remember that. But I said at the beginning that David begins with a statement. In the Lord I put my trust. That's his opening statement. And then he says, because of that, how are you saying to my soul, flee as a bird? And then they come back and they say, well, no, look, the wicked bend their bow and so on. And what can the righteous do? When you are prone to discouragement, and aren't we all at times? If you feel the foundation is crumbling, whatever foundation it is, let this be your answer. Well, I put my trust in the Lord. And that makes a difference. What can the righteous do if the foundations are crumbling? Well, they can look to the right place. They can grasp the right principles. And they can remember the right promises. And may God bless his word to our hearts. We're going to sing now, and we're going to sing in Psalm 11. Stephen, up at the back there, could you perhaps lead this singing? Psalm 11, we're going to sing, we'll sing just 4 verses just now. I'd like to sing the whole psalm, but I've taken a little longer than I intended with that part of the service. So we'll restrict ourselves to 4 verses just now. Psalm 11, I won't read the verses because we've just considered them together. I in the Lord do put my trust. I in the